Hello and welcome to the Gonzales Mitchell Show. I'm Clay Mitchell.
And I'm Patrick Gonzales.
And today, Patrick and I have a very special guest. He's on our broadcast for the second time. That is Professor Cool of Johns Hopkins University. He is the principal of Tred Avon Strategies. That is none other than Mr. Len Foxwell. Len, how you doing?
Happy Friday, Clay. Happy Friday, Mr. Gonzales. It is a privilege to be back. And I'll say this is a great Friday because in just a few hours, the Johns Hopkins University football team, many of whom, Clay, you've met in your various visits to our class to help me teach professional communications. They're going to take the field this evening against Rowan University in a big Friday night game. So trying to get through the day and get my customary seat on the 50-yard line over at Homewood Field.
Awesome.
Well, I've got to interject, Clay, real quick, okay? My buddy's son, Josh Ehrlich, is the quarterback for Susquehanna, and I predict Susquehanna and Johns Hopkins are going to meet up before the year is out, and it's going to be a battle royale.
Let me tell you something. Susquehanna is a tough out, Patrick. A couple of years ago,
they are.
Johns Hopkins took an undefeated record into the Susquehanna game at home, and Susquehanna won. So that is not an easy game. They are a tough, physical team. And I didn't realize that Josh Ehrlich was playing for Susquehanna. That actually adds to the volume of the challenge.
There you go.
Yes, absolutely.
There you go. Well, Len, we have this Gonzales poll that came out talking about transportation, the problems that we have here in the state. How are we going to fund it? What are we going to do? What's the road forward? As you know, we had Mike Ciccato on yesterday, and he spoke about it. We wanted to bring you in and get all of your thoughts.
Well, first of all, the poll was methodologically impeccable, coming as it did from Maryland's foremost survey researcher, Mr. Gonzales. And I think the poll told me one thing that was obvious. I had an old political science professor named Dr. Harry Basart, who's still with us, thankfully, who would say that a good poll provides scientific confirmation of the obvious. And I think that the obvious point was that Marylanders are tired of sitting in gridlock day after day and month after month and year after year. They're tired of the safety concerns, the accidents, the wear and tear, the damages to their vehicles that arise from Maryland's crumbling network of roads, highways, and bridges. The poll shows us that by a substantial margin, Marylanders are willing and ready to invest in real solutions. And then here's the point that I really want to emphasize. They specifically want a greater investment in roads, highways, and bridges for all the aforementioned reasons having to do with livelihoods, saving lives, and protecting our quality of life. Now, here's something that's surprising. And Patrick, you probably know where I'm going to go with this, that the strongest reservoir of public support for greater investment in roads, highways, and bridges comes from some of the more traditional components of the Democratic coalition: Black voters, women voters, metropolitan and urban voters, and registered Democrats. And I really think that flies in the face of the longstanding Annapolis conventional wisdom that would have us believe that progressive Democrats just want more transit, whereas it's those rural and outer suburban Republican trending voters that want more roads. No, it's the people who are on the roads every day. This is not Democrat versus Republican. This is shaping up as a split, if you will, between those who have the luxury of working from their kitchen islands on a Monday or a Friday, have the luxury of remote working and flex scheduling, between those folks and the folks who actually have to be on the roads no matter what: our first responders, our nurses, our school teachers, our bus drivers, folks who work in the services industry, folks who work in the construction industry. They're on the roads. They see what's happening with our crumbling infrastructure, and they're ready to move forward from the status quo. So I'm hoping that this show of not only that the support is broad, but where the support is strongest will actually move our governor and our legislature to make a generational investment in our crumbling network of roads, highways, and bridges.
Patrick?
No, I think Len summed it up perfectly. And the way it was designed is what I try to do all the time, which is, and I appreciate Len's compliment, because I literally do, every time I do a poll, I try to take the reality and then frame it in a way that reaches the objective of the client, but also is framed in a way, guys, when I do a poll, I'm talking to 800 different, unique, diverse Marylanders. And you got to frame it in a way that each one of them, as best as possible, interprets what you're asking. So you can't use jargon or this and that. And in that aim, I think Len's absolutely right. The undeniable result from this poll is people are aware of the situation and nobody wants to pay taxes, but people are willing to deal with it because they understand that nothing in life is free.
Well said.
And Len, like you said, the poll affirms the obvious. From living previously in Easton, I live here on the Eastern Shore on Kent Island, and I have a place up in Kent County, the Bay Bridge. The last big public works project I think there was Reach the Beach,
right,
back during the Schaefer administration in the late 80s. And at the same time in the 80s, there was the building of I-97 connecting the Annapolis area to the Baltimore area. That was really the last big, huge project that I remember. And I think you've used the phrase before, a generational investment in transportation. It's now been about 40 years since the last big one, vis-a-vis the Bay Bridge, I-97, Reach the Beach. There were some projects around the various beltways, but it's obvious based on the poll, people are sick and tired of sitting in traffic. We have a lot more Marylanders than we did, and drivers than we did in 1985.
You're exactly right, Clay, and I should take this opportunity to remember the contribution that your own father, who as Speaker of the House, really shepherded through Governor Schaefer's Reach the Beach initiative through the legislative funding process. That new Kent Narrows, I'm old enough to call them the new Kent Narrows, the new Malchus Bridge, and the new Vienna Bridge, even though they're now each more than 30 years of age. But without those investments that your father shepherded through the budget process, the state of Maryland would be in a far worse condition than it is right now, economically and from a public safety perspective. And I think your point, Clay, is absolutely right, that we are now, and where we are now is analogous to probably where we were in the late 1980s and early 1990s, where our investments in new roads, bridges, and highways, widening capacity, improving the safety and reliability of our bridges, we just haven't kept pace with population growth. And we have not fully adjusted to the aging of our infrastructure. 48% of our roads and bridges in the state of Maryland right now are aging and structurally deficient. It's just the truth. Aging or structurally deficient, I would say. And as we know, as any homeowner can tell you, that when you have a physical asset that is aging, things don't get better with age. They only get worse. And this week has provided a real object lesson in what the consequences of continued degradation of our transportation assets could bring. We saw what happened with the Bay Bridge yesterday because they had to make some emergency repairs at the bridge and at the approach to the bridge. Backups for miles. We see what happens with Clay, you're in Kent Island, when we have gridlock. Not only are motorists stuck in traffic away from their families, but goods cannot connect with markets, people cannot connect with services, and first responders cannot reach the site of an emergency. So again, I just want to reemphasize that this investment, whether it comes through the establishment of regional transportation authorities, whether it comes through increased application of public-private partnerships. This is about lives, livelihoods, and life, the quality of life that makes Maryland separate from our neighbors. If we don't do it, we are going to lose literally everything that makes Maryland special to begin with.
I'm sure there's examples of this all over the state. For instance, there's a backup at the Bay Bridge, there's an accident or whatnot. It had been that the commissioners, in cooperation with the state, had closed off that ramp that goes onto the Bay Bridge, forcing everybody to stay on 50.
Right.
And for local traffic, that worked. But as time goes on, people find little holes to go through that they take their car through, and they take another shortcut, and you get that heavy traffic on the back roads again. I'm
That's
sure
exactly
that goes
right.
all over the state. And as you pointed out, Len, it's not just inconvenience sitting in traffic. It's the first responders, the fire department, the police department that have a problem navigating through all that to get to an emergency. And it's been like we were pointing out since the mid 80s, since anything was done. If something was done on the side roads approaching the bridge on both sides and in other areas of the state, it would go a long way to alleviate some of that pressure on like the bridge, one of the major arteries in the state.
And Clay, to your point, and Patrick, to the points you've made at the outset, this is about not only improving our road infrastructure, this will actually improve transit ridership. We seem to have this false choice in Annapolis that you can either be for roads or for transit. You can't be both. It's one or the other. When in reality, if we have better road highway infrastructure, rest assured, we will grow transit ridership. Let me give you an example. So if I'm someone who is living in the up county of Montgomery County, if I'm living in Germantown or Darnestown or Clarksburg, if I'm trying to make it down to take the Red Line station at Shady Grove to my office in downtown DC, if I'm running 20 to 30 minutes behind already because traffic is already backed up on I-70 and I-270, guess what? I'm not going to veer off the road, take the time, park my car, wait for a train that will probably make me another 15 minutes behind. Okay, so that's one less rider on mass transit. That's one more car on the road, and the only one that benefits from that is whatever guy owns the parking garage in downtown DC.
Yep.
So, and then similarly, if we don't have good transit infrastructure, that puts even more pressure on the surrounding roads. When I was the secretary of the Washington Suburban Transit Commission 25 years ago, working with Metro, we had a stat that said if without a fully functioning Washington Metro system, the region's road network would need an additional 1,400 lanes of capacity. I suspect that number has gone up substantially since then, but that was 25 years ago.
I'm not an excellent example of the typical Maryland commuter or traveler. However, on a personal level, I love driving up. If I'm going into Baltimore for whatever reason, whether it's a game or whether it's business downtown, I love driving to Cromwell Station, parking and taking the light rail in. And likewise, the few times I have to go to Washington, I don't like driving in Washington. So what I do is I go to the MARC train at Odenton, I hop on, and it's just a wonderful experience.
That's right.
So again, I'm not typical, but boy, I can sure dig, Len, that it's not a competition. And I think when we looked at it, the results overall, Marylanders don't think it's a competition between roads and bridges and transit. We're all in this together, and together we're going to find a solution.
I completely agree. And we are going to find a solution because we have to find a solution. Governor Moore has a couple of very important policy goals. One is he wants to go to 100% clean energy by 2035. He is a leader nationally in the fight against climate change. And the transportation infrastructure issues that we have right now it is only contributing to the climate problem by putting more and more carbon emissions into the air. Number two, he wants to create more affordable housing. So that's more homes in more subdivisions in more communities around the state. We are going to have a fully functional, modernized network of roads, highways, and bridges just to accommodate that population growth, whether they're driving directly to their destinations or whether they're driving to a transit center to take the bus or the train. We have to and the third thing I should say is that this governor says all over the state, I want to go to other jurisdictions. I want to go to Virginia, Pennsylvania, and come back with a couple of businesses. We've heard him say that on numerous occasions. And if he is serious about doing that, and we believe he is, and no one can make the case better than Governor Moore, and he is a pro-business Democrat, then we have got to show entrepreneurs and corporate CEOs and workers that we have the infrastructure that we need to connect workers with jobs and products with markets, or else it's not going to work.
Len, when it comes to the funding mechanism of this, I just want to, I always have to bring in my Eastern Shore, and
Yes,
being from the Eastern Shore yourself, how we're sort of marginalized in a lot of this. When there was discussion of raising taxes, there's the gas tax, everybody pays it. If there was talk of raising the sales tax in order to fund this, I start to step back and have a little bit of a problem, because I get there's a plan maybe to do some regional taxations where regions can decide whether to have an extra tax or not. But everybody forgets the 9 counties of the Eastern Shore is fettered to Delaware that has a 0% sales tax. And if you raise it from 6, say, to 7%, I just point out that it's anti-business for the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and that would further exacerbate the problems we're having losing business across that state line. If there was some sort of flexibility in the funding mechanism proposed for that, recognizing the unique problems of the shore, that would go a long way. Also, watermen have to fuel their boats. They don't need the roads. Why should a tax be imposed on them? Just like farmers, tractors, except to move from one farm to another, they're not on the roads. I think if there's a funding solution done, the rural parts of the state have to be considered in that calculation, not just treated like everybody else because we have the least amount of roads in the state. What do you think?
So I think the actual funding mechanisms that we ultimately determine are the best path forward, that's going to have to be determined by the governor and the legislature. What I think Patrick's poll did expertly was give our policymakers and stakeholders a sense of which items are dead on arrival and then which funding strategies merit some further consideration. I don't think this is the end of the conversation. I think it's just the beginning of a much larger conversation of potential options or blended options. We saw where a gasoline tax is a non-starter, and regardless of my opinion on whether or not we could do this through a gas tax or not, it's immaterial. The data is what the data is. And then similarly, a revenue generating mechanism that's progressive based on vehicle miles traveled, well, I would suggest that probably is harmful against residents of rural and outer suburban areas who are naturally going to have to travel longer distances to job sites and school and other things. Sales tax, there was a broad-based willingness to consider that mechanism so long as the receipts are dedicated for transportation. And I think that gets back to something that we have wrestled with in the past, which is that there has not always been absolute trust in the Transportation Trust Fund because that money has been used for other general fund purposes throughout the years. I mean, we saw several years ago where, to make our way through some fiscal challenges in the state, we had to divert money from both the Transportation Trust Fund and from local receipts that are given directly to the municipalities and counties by the federal government. And so if we're going to go down this path, whatever the mechanisms are, whether it's a regional transportation authority, whether it's a sales tax, or expanded public-private partnerships, we've got to make sure that the statutory framework is in place to absolutely make sure that money is set aside for transportation, and that those who are paying into this revenue source can actually see the results.
I'm from the Eastern Shore and Missouri, so they got to show me, because it's always, those trust funds are always robbed. But we have to reach a solution on this, and hopefully the governor and the legislature will concentrate on this. I'm sure they will, because this is really getting to be a top issue among Maryland voters.
I think the Eastern Shore is probably the region of the state that I can think of that is in most urgent need of substantive investment. I mean, we've made the investments to dualize Route 404 because people were literally dying on that road from Route 50 to the Delaware line. We made the investment in Route 113 down in Berlin and Snow Hill, and we did the Salisbury bypass. All those projects are now, well over 20 years old, believe it or not.
They are.
And so I think there's this policy like you and I do to think of all these investments as new, but they are now approaching middle age, and that existing infrastructure needs repair and improvement. And we need to think about what we can do to expand our carrying capacity throughout the region.
It does. Well, Len, Patrick, and I thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
We want to have you back again, because session looms, and there's going to be all kinds of other stuff to talk about, including transportation, but all kinds of cool stuff coming down the road, my friend.
I can't wait. Gentlemen, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. I share it all over the place. Godspeed, and keep it up, because you're providing an invaluable public service.
Thank you.
Thank you, Len.
See
And
you guys.
I'm afraid now it's time to say goodbye, Patrick. Len?
Goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick.
And thank you for being here, Len. We'll have you on again here real soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Have a
you,
great
Len.
weekend.
Thank you.